We've also heard from local schools whose trips have been canceled or postponed. Students from Bishop Kearney returned to Rochester's airport today. They were supposed to spend 9 days touring Europe, but only got as far as Washington, D.C.
They just kind of gathered us up together, and they had looks of disappointment on our faces, so we just turned to each other and we're like, we're going home.
How could that happen? How could a volcano in Iceland, of all places, cause such a disrupt throughout the whole of Europe?
A lot of people saying that the company that booked the trip says if enough students sign up, they'll reschedule the trip for sometime this summer. And members of Greece Athena's show choir are stranded in Toronto, but are still hoping to make it to their final destination of Athens, Greece.
Well, more out.
Now, the eruptions melted the thick ice of a nearby glacier, causing some flash flooding. And look at this. Locally, it's bad news for a group of 40 Bishop Kearney students. It cost them the trip of a lifetime. It was a 9-day tour of Europe that they had been planning for over a year. But instead of arriving in Paris this morning, this group touched back down in Rochester. Sadly, they got as far as Washington when, because of those ash clouds, they had to turn around.
It's a great lesson on the globe. It's a great lesson also just on human behavior, the way that they helped each other struggle with this. I saw people melt down, and the other students just really built them up. It was a beautiful thing.
We're just kind of waiting for the flight, and then we realized it's not going to happen. So it was a big upset, but hopefully it'll get rescheduled in the summer.
Now, the cloud of ash also forced a change of plans for some
highlight teenager.
They were on their way to Paris, but the volcano in Iceland put a stop to it.
For air travel, as many as 18,000 flights in Europe were canceled today alone. It's costing airlines more than $200 million a day in lost revenue. The problem isn't visibility, it's the fact that jet engines act like a vacuum, sucking in the debris, leading to engine failure. This impact is also hitting home. Some students from Bishop Kearney High School were booked to fly to Paris. They got as far as Washington, and then they had to come home. Matt Malloy reports.
It was not the trip that 40 Bishop Kearney students had planned.
Really excited. We were counting down by the day. But we'll be counting for a couple more days.
By now, they should have been in Paris, but they returned home to Rochester after a stopover in Washington, D.C. Their plane from D.C. to Paris never took off.
How could that happen? How could a volcano in Iceland, of all places, cause such a disrupt throughout the whole of Europe?
Michael LaLiberte is the students' tour leader.
They learned about volcanology very fast.
Their tour director says despite this disappointment, they all pulled together to help each other as they returned here back to Rochester.
I saw people melt down, and the other students just really built them up. It was a beautiful thing. I have never been more proud of my students than what they did the past 24 hours.
As for Jessica, her family has planned an impromptu trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's no Paris, but she'll take it.
They were so excited, so yeah, it'll be really nice to take her away and get some relaxation too.
In Rochester, Matt Malloy, Fox First at 10.
And the Kearney students aren't the only local students feeling the...
It's costing them the trip of a lifetime, a 9-day tour of Europe they'd been planning for over a year.
I'm feeling pretty let down. I was really pumped for this trip for like a year and a half, and now, we had to come back here within 23 hours of the trip. So it's pretty disappointing.
So instead of arriving in Paris this morning, the first group of students touched back down here in Rochester. There were hugs and tears as they were greeted by their parents. The students flew as far as Washington, D.C. yesterday. Then they found out the rest of their trip was over. They spent the night in a hotel. Then they had to get up very early this morning to head home. The trip to Europe included sightseeing in France, Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. The group's leader says despite the shortness of this trip, the students did learn a few important lessons, and they're hopeful about planning another tour.
It's a great lesson on the globe. It's a great lesson also just on human behavior, the way that they helped each other struggle with this. I saw people melt down, and the other students just really built them up. It was a beautiful thing.
We're just kind of waiting for the flight, and then we realized it's not going to happen. So it was a big upset, but hopefully it'll get rescheduled in the summer.
Well, the cloud of ash also forced a change of plans.
Janet, disappointment, anger, sadness. These students say they are feeling a lot of different emotions today. About 40 juniors and seniors from Bishop Kearney High School had planned a 9-day trip through Europe. In fact, today they were supposed to be in Paris. Instead, it was a tearful return home at the Rochester airport. The first group of students came back at 9:30 this morning, many of them greeted by parents who promised alternative spring break plans. The students flew as far as Washington, D.C. yesterday. When they found out the rest of their trip was over, had to spend the night in a hotel and then got up early this morning to come back home. The trip to Europe included sightseeing in France, Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. One student said this cancellation is just hard to believe.
You only get to go on your senior trip once, and this one got canceled. I mean, who expects their volcano to erupt and block all the flights going to Europe? You just don't plan for that kind of stuff, you know?
Some of these students worked for a full year to get ready for this. They took part-time jobs. We did fundraising. They're very disappointed, but knowing that we are working on rescheduling it, that gives them hope.
Heard the group leader mention it there. The company that they planned this all with says that they can reschedule this. They have given them 100% refunds and said they could rebook this tour in June or July. We asked a few students about that, if they'd be interested. They said they definitely want to do that.
Yeah, it's got to be so disappointing for them. Obviously, you know, these aren't the only students impacted by this volcano.
That's right. Actually, the Greece Athena,
but instead they had to fly back to Rochester. Right now, Christine Van Timmeren is live at the Rochester airport waiting for another group to come back home. Christine?
Rebecca, it was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. 40 students and staff from Bishop Kearney High School were headed to Europe for 9 days for their senior trip. But yesterday, they got some bad news. Their flight to Europe was canceled because of that volcanic ash from Iceland. Now, the first group of students arrived back here around 9:30 this morning, and it was sad faces and tears as they embraced parents waiting to pick them up. Now, the students flew as far as Washington, D.C. yesterday, and when they found out the rest of their trip was canceled, they spent the night in a hotel and had to get up early this morning to head back home. Now, the trip to Europe included sightseeing in France, Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. It was a dream students had been planning for over a year.
Yeah, I mean, you only get to go on your senior trip once, and this one got canceled. I mean, who expects their volcano to erupt and block all the flights going to Europe? You just don't plan for that kind of stuff, you know?
They've handled it so well, because as a big disappointment goes, you know, they've really been very upbeat about it. They know that it's a disaster, and it's you know, it's out of the ordinary.
Now, it's not all bad news for students. The travel company that helped plan this, said that they are going to be fully reimbursed, and that if there's interest, they can plan the trip for this next June or July. And Rebecca, the second group of those students is going to be headed back to the airport around 1:30 today.
Oh, you feel so badly for them. But has this had any kind of ripple effect on the parents of those kids?
Exactly. Parents who said that they had a spring break trip planned to Florida now say, okay, well, now I need to find a flight for my student to come with me, or they've had to cancel their trip altogether. So it's kind of thrown a wrench into everyone's plans.
Oh, it's a big mess. All right.